LiberalViewer presents.
So, welcome to the November 22nd edition of LiberalViewer Monday Media Mixup. Thanks for joining me. Today I'll be using the 11 best, most newsworthy clips I picked out from the Sunday morning news analysis shows from the big five corporate outlets of ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and Fox News for what should be an informative media criticism and political commentary show for you all today. My main title topic, as you can see if you're already watching the video, is Kyle Rittenhouse verdict makes America more dangerous. That's the question I'm asking, and I will be talking about that using several clips. The best one probably from the CEO of the NAACP, Derek Johnson. I'll also show a couple Republicans, Senator Kevin Cramer and former New Jersey Governor Chris Christie, talking about the Kyle Rittenhouse verdict. And I'll also talk about this ACLU reaction that I tweeted on Friday, or retweeted, I should say, about the ACLU's reaction finding or pointing out the failure of Kenosha police to protect protesters and also police complicity with white militias. So I'll be talking about that as well. And before I get to all that, however, for my political comedy, I want to show you the MSNBC The Sunday Show with Jonathan Capehart making fun of, I guess, an up-and-coming Republican star, the new lieutenant governor elected in Virginia, Winsome Sears. This is her talking on CNN State of the Union earlier in the morning, and I'll actually show you, that'll be the last clip I show you, clip 11. In fact, if you go down into the video description, you can see I've put brief summaries of all 11 clips. And so this is my first clip, the political comedy, their amused reaction, has very small parts of my last clip. But I'll talk about all of that a little more with you after we watch. This is Jonathan Capehart and Michael Harriot and Maria Teresa Kumar. And I think only Maria Teresa Kumar's criticism is unwarranted based on the much longer, like 7-minute clip I'm going to show you at the end. But here's the very abbreviated version and the MSNBC commentary that I'll talk about with you a little more after we watch together over here.
But you're not saying whether you are vaccinated. Do you want to say now?
As I said, America, if it's nothing else, it's about liberty. It's about being able to live your life free from the government telling you what to do. And so we understand this thing about slippery slopes. The minute that I start telling you about my vaccine status, we're going to be down the bottom of the mountain trying to figure out how we got there, because now you want to know what's in my DNA. You're going to want to know this, that, and the other.
What's in her DNA? More like, what's in her coffee cup? You can see why Virginia's new lieutenant governor-elect is already stirring up controversy. My panel is back, Michael, Brez, Maria Teresa. But wait, there's more. Lieutenant Governor-elect Winsome Sears of Virginia. She was asked how slavery should be taught. Let's watch.
But while we're talking about history, how about we talk about how people from the 1890s, black people from the 1890s to about 1950, 1960, according to the U.S. Census, had been marrying at a percentage that had far surpassed anything that whites had ever done. When we talk about the Tulsa race riots, let's ask ourselves, how did the black people amass so much wealth right after the Civil War so that it could even be destroyed? How did they do that? You know, they were coming from nothing, from zero. Some of them never even got the 40 acres and a mule.
Michael, you know I'm coming to you on this, and I just want to put a fact check in there. Let's just be clear. No freed slaves got their 40 acres and a mule. But, Michael, Your reaction to the lieutenant governor-elect of the Commonwealth of Virginia?
Well, that's that typical Republican talking point of family values and marriage and the family, a stable Christian conservative ideals is what really drives America. And it is weird how they pick and choose which part of America and American history they want to celebrate. Like they want to celebrate the Constitution and the Founding Fathers, but not the racism part and not the slavery part, and they don't want to teach that part. And so they acknowledge that, you know, our values as far as the Second Amendment, right? We've always had that ideal in America, and it's how we should currently operate, but not the racism part, and it doesn't influence us anymore. And so this idea of and it's not just critical race theory, right? This is white history. This is what white people have done, and this is what white people have brought upon America that they don't want to teach their children about themselves. But perpetuating it ensures that it will continue to happen, and we see that time and time again. And so that hands-off remembers this sweet romantic idea of an America that never existed is what we see from Winsome Sears. And, you know, as far as what's in her DNA, it's probably a double helix, but I can't confirm that.
I just want to say that in her response, when she talks about the Tulsa race riots, you know, how did they amass their wealth so that it could even be destroyed? She just glosses over the fact that, you know, that people destroyed all that stuff because racism and white supremacy. Maria Teresa, I would love for you to weigh in on this. If not, I can move on to Ted Cruz.
Well, no, I think the most dangerous part of it is that she's the lieutenant governor of Virginia, and she's telling people not to get vaccinated. If the Republican Party wants people to go back to normal, businesses open, maskless schools, this is how you do it. And she had the perfect platform to say that the importance of the vaccines actually help the African-American community, the Latino community, because we all know that those are the communities that are the most hesitant and most distrustful. She not only wasted everybody's time, but she perpetuated terrible stereotypes. And this idea that not recognizing what the Black experience was, that despite everything, they were able to amass wealth. And despite everything, they were able to lift themselves out of poverty. And instead, she kind of did a hoodwink and said, well, somebody gave it to them. That's just absolutely nonsense. The offenses on this one, Jonathan, just keep going on and on.
So there you see MSNBC making fun of the much longer clip I'm going to show you as clip 11 at the very end of Virginia Lieutenant Governor-elect Winsome Sears. And I think all the criticism of what you said about critical race theory and her DNA, I actually like Jonathan Capehart's original political comedy joke there about how, what's in your DNA, what's in your coffee cup or whatever. But I didn't quite get Michael Harriot's joke about her DNA allegedly being a double helix or something. I don't even know what that was about. But all that criticism and even more, there's even more misinformation from this newly elected lieutenant governor of Virginia. But she actually, you'll see, she does tell people to get vaccinated, even though she won't say if she's been vaccinated. And she says some negative things about vaccines that aren't true. But she does at one point tell people to get vaccinated. So that by one criticism there, Maria Teresa Kumar's criticism. But now I want to get to the 5 news summaries from all 5 of the big 5 corporate outlets, from the longest to the shortest, all juxtaposed together. And a lot of them focused on the Kyle Rittenhouse verdict. There were a couple kind of good news summaries on that, especially the one from CBS News Face the Nation, although it's not the beginning of the show news summary, but I'll show it right after the beginning of the show news summary. But the longest beginning of the show news summary this week was not NBC News' Meet the Press as it usually is. It was Fox News Sunday, where Bret Baier was the guest host, and he had 2 different reporters. First, Alexis McAdams reporting from Kenosha, and then David Spunt with Biden, I think in Delaware, first talking about the Kyle Rittenhouse verdict. And you can kind of, I don't know, is it fair and balanced? I mean, it's more fair and balanced than what you're going to see from Tucker Carlson, for sure. They don't really report on how Tucker Carlson had like a documentary crew embedded with Kyle Rittenhouse. You would think that would be something they might disclose. But then the David Spunt coverage of the Biden administration, a little more biased, especially in terms of Vice President Harris. And I will talk about all of that a little more after we watch this first longest news summary from Fox News Sunday yesterday together over here.
And hello again from Fox News Sunday. Americans from coast to coast are reacting this weekend to the acquittal of Kyle Rittenhouse in a case that has served as a political litmus test for an already polarized nation. Many on the right are cheering the jury's not guilty verdict in a win for citizen self-defense and Second Amendment rights, while many on the left are saying it illustrates the bias and racial discrimination in the country's justice system. We began with Fox team coverage. David Spunt traveling with the president in Wilmington, Delaware. But first to Alexis McAdams on the ground in Kenosha, Wisconsin. Alexis.
Brett, that's right. A very emotional more than 2 weeks here in Kenosha, Wisconsin, and that trial that divided so many people across America now over. Kyle Rittenhouse walking free, but not everybody thinks this was self-defense.
We, the jury, find the defendant, Kyle H. Rittenhouse, not guilty.
It was the verdict Wendy Rittenhouse had been waiting to hear for 15 months.
My stomach does knots and my palms are sweaty and the motions running through me.
Her son, Kyle Rittenhouse, collapsing in the courtroom after finding out he's now free. Rittenhouse was on trial for shooting 3 white men, killing 2 during the unrest in Kenosha, Wisconsin, following the police shooting of Jacob Blake. Outside of the courthouse, there was an outpouring of emotions from both sides.
You can go out in the streets and just play shoot 'em up.
I believe in self-defense.
Protesters across the country took to the streets calling for justice reform. In Portland, Oregon, police declaring a riot, and hundreds of others marching in Chicago and New York City, where several were arrested.
We have to wake up and make change.
As those cries for justice reform grow, New York's mayor-elect Eric Adams calling for swift and righteous action to prevent more violence.
No more vigilante justice. No more vigilante justice.
Jesse Jackson, the longtime civil rights leader, says this verdict throws doubt into the safety of people who protest in support of Black Americans and is calling for a federal trial for Rittenhouse. Now, it's been very quiet on the ground here in Kenosha following that verdict, but there is a rally planned here near the courthouse at 3 o'clock today calling for true justice in this case. Closing arguments in another emotionally charged test of the American justice system begin on Monday in Georgia for the closing case on the Ahmaud Arbery trial. Brett?
Alexis McAdams reporting from Kenosha. Alexis, thank you. Now let's turn to David Spunt with the president in Wilmington, Delaware. David?
Hi, Brett. The verdict in Kenosha heard loudly throughout the power corridors of Washington, prompting contrasting statements from the president and his vice president.
I stand by what the jury has concluded. The jury system works, and we have to abide by it.
Hours later, a frustrated vice president.
Clearly, there's a lot more work to do.
The Rittenhouse verdict seizing the spotlight from Democrats' big victory in Washington.
On this vote, the yeas are 220, the nays are 213. The Build Back Better bill is passed.
Cheers on the House floor from Democrats after President Biden's nearly $2 trillion social spending bill passed by a thin margin. The vote came just hours after the Republican leader Kevin McCarthy spent 8 hours and 32 minutes railing against the plan, the longest speech in House history.
And every page of this new Washington spending shows just how irresponsible and out of touch the Democrats are.
The bill marks the 7th large government spending package since the beginning of the pandemic. Now the focus turns to the Senate, where margins are even thinner, and all eyes are on 2 moderate Democrats, Arizona's Kyrsten Sinema and West Virginia's Joe Manchin.
It's going to take a while to get through the Senate. I think it'll probably be after Thanksgiving.
The president, who celebrated his 79th birthday yesterday here in Wilmington, Delaware, will head to Nantucket for the Thanksgiving holiday to celebrate it with family and friends. But he has an important decision to make, Brett, whether or not to replace Jerome Powell, the Federal Reserve Chair, as inflation continues to threaten this presidency. Brett.
David Spunt reporting from Wilmington. David, thank you. Joining us now, Director of the National Economic Council, Brian Deese. Brian, welcome back to Fox News.
And I don't have any clips of Brian Deese, although they did talk about how the bills were paid for, which didn't seem to come up. You saw in David Spunt's reporting, he talked about it being a nearly $2 trillion social spending bill, and actually talked about Kevin McCarthy's long 8-hour overnight speech on the floor of the House, but didn't show like the ridiculous parts, the parts about baby carrots. And if it had been a Democrat talking about baby carrots, I think it would have been on Fox News Sunday. And they talked about, again, you saw David Spunt's 7th largest spending package, that they don't talk about how it's almost completely paid for or completely paid for, depending on how much extra money you think the IRS will be able to take in over 10 years based on their extra enforcement they put in the bill. And even the worst estimates are maybe a couple $100 billion deficit over 10 years, which is not a lot of money in Washington terms, but that you didn't make it into David Spunt's reporting. The Alexis McAdams report on Kyle Rittenhouse, I would say, I mean, at least she did get that thing about the verdict making, putting it on Jesse Jackson, who's not very popular on Fox News, but that worried about the safety of protesters protesting for, Black Lives Matter and that type of thing, that those people are going to feel chilled in their free speech. That's important. There in the gun law case that's before the Supreme Court right now about the New York gun law, that is actually the ACLU's argument in its amicus brief, that having too many people carrying around guns chills people's free speech and their ability to go out in the street and protest, and that New York has a right to regulate what kind of which people are carrying around concealed weapons. And I guess we'll see what the Supreme Court says about that. But that is one of the problems from the Rittenhouse case. I think the fact that apparently, according to the judge in the case, it was legal for him to carry around that AR-15, just like that is something that needs to be more regulated. But I guess we'll see what the Supreme Court says about the New York law. And even though Alexis McAdams did give Jesse Jackson's concern about the ability of protesters to safely engage in their First Amendment activities, I do think that the one thing about that report is that it really humanized Kyle Rittenhouse more than his victims, which I guess even if you believe he acted in self-defense, you could still call them victims, whatever the judge in the case said. I certainly am not precluded from calling them victims. And sometimes on Fox News, they've even had the spouse partner of what's his name? See, I even watched a lot of that trial, and I'm having problems remembering the names of all of the victims. But hold on one second, I will. Yeah, there they are. So yeah, Anthony Huber. I've seen the partner of Anthony Huber on the news talking about, how she wished she could come home at the end of the day and unload her burdens on her spouse, partner, or whatever, but she can't because he's gone, and now no one will ever be accountable for that. That clip didn't make it into, that could have humanized the other side a little more, but anyway, I think I've talked enough, both pre and post criticize that Fox News Sunday clip there, and so I will move on to the next, just a little bit shorter news summary. And this seems to be like a theme on NBC News' Meet the Press. I showed last week they had they're really talking about the rising violence on the right and the Trump takeover of the Republican Party and how it's a threat to America. And you'll see in this NBC News Meet the Press news summary that Chuck Todd, both in the live introduction and then the extensive pre-recorded package, talks about America being divided in the Rittenhouse verdict and the Ahmaud Arbery trial, and then the censure of Representative Paul Gosar for his violent anime that he tweeted about killing Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and slashing Joe Biden, and it mixes in the threat of Donald Trump, and it's kind of similar to what you'll see from Margaret Brennan and Mark Strassman a little later on, but I think they're both arguably the best news summaries, and they're both fairly extensive, and I'll talk about this one a little more after we watch it together over here.
Meet the Press.
Oh, one thing I forgot to mention, I started the clip a little earlier than I usually do because, there's this whole teaser part where Chuck Todd talks about what's going to be on the program, and then it goes to, what's his name, Dennis Haspert, the original president on the show 24, and he's done some other, I think he does some sort of insurance commercials too, but and for some reason you can see Chuck Todd's sitting waiting for that little for the longest running show in show business history. It's Meet the Press with Chuck Todd, and or whatever that it's supposed to roll doesn't roll. That's why I started a little early, because just so I could show you the Chuck Todd deer in the headlights look that I will talk about with you. Possibly I'll talk about it with you a little more after we watch the entire news summary together over here.
Meet the Press. Good Sunday morning. This past week, we got more evidence of just how divided we've become as a country. On Friday, a Wisconsin jury found Kyle Rittenhouse not guilty on all counts of shooting 3 men, 2 fatally, at a Kenosha protest last summer, sparked by the shooting of a black man by a white police officer. At the same time, in Georgia right now, there are 3 men who are on trial, charged with an unprovoked killing of a black man, Ahmaud Arbery. And earlier in the week, just 2 House Republicans joined Democrats in censuring Republican Congressman Paul Gosar and stripping him of his committee assignments, after Gosar posted an animated video showing him killing his colleague, Democrat Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. All 3 episodes, the trials at the intersection of race, guns, and self-defense, and the GOP, at least the House GOP's near unanimous dismissal of violent imagery against a Democrat, are further evidence of a fraying America. Yes, the politics of division and the weaponization of grievance have helped both parties raise money and raise the temperature in this country. But the Republican vote in the House condoning Gosar's actions was more than that. It appears to be another step towards embracing former President Trump's radical behavior. The violent rhetoric that he embraces, the coddling of the January 6 rioters, the big lie, even attacking Republicans for simply voting for a public works bill. All of it has helped lead us to this moment. What used to be dismissed as dangerous rhetoric from the far right that nobody was listening to is now being mainstreamed by the man who is reshaping the Republican Party in his own image.
We, the jury, find the defendant, Kyle H. Rittenhouse, not guilty.
The verdict, not guilty on all counts, magnifying the divisions in a deeply polarized America.
It was a case about self-defense, the right to protect oneself.
You cannot claim self-defense against a danger you create.
Kyle Rittenhouse came to Kenosha as a counter-protester. He says to protect property, following the police shooting of Jacob Blake last year.
Self-defense is somebody enters your house and they're doing you wrong. He was out on the street, he was a provocateur, and he had these people come to him.
You just emboldened all of these people that are filled with so much hate. They are now emboldened.
Rittenhouse was interviewed by Fox News after leaving the courtroom.
How do you feel, man? The jury reached the correct verdict. Self-defense is not illegal.
Throughout the trial, Rittenhouse was praised on right-wing media.
When legitimate authority refuses to do its duty, its sworn duty, others will fill the vacuum.
And lionized by many politicians on the right.
If we don't defend this young boy who defended his community when no one else was doing it, it may very well be your baby boy that they come for.
Kyle Rittenhouse would probably make a pretty good congressional intern.
Kyle Rittenhouse is not guilty, my friends. You have a right to defend yourselves. Be armed, be dangerous, and be moral.
A lot of people would have been very angry in this country if that young man was in any way convicted.
Already, far-right groups are calling Rittenhouse the hero we've been waiting for. Republican Missouri Senate candidate Mark McCloskey, who launched a career in politics after pleading guilty to waving his gun at protesters last summer, showed up at the Kenosha courthouse, photographed with two men flashing white supremacist hand signals. The verdict caps a week marked by signs of America's widening political divide.
We cannot have a member joking about murdering each other or threatening the President of the United States.
After House Republicans all but condoned the posting of that violent video by Congressman Paul Gosar.
If I must join Alexander Hamilton, the first person attempted to be censored by this House, so be it.
What do you believe the action against Paul Gosar accomplished yesterday?
Making the House even more bitter. But I think you can't let somebody threaten to kill another colleague, even in jest.
Republican leader Kevin McCarthy, who joined all House Republicans 2 years ago to strip then Congressman Steve King of his committee assignments after King's white supremacist comments.
That is not the party of Lincoln, and it's definitely not America.
Now defends Gosar.
I do not condone violence, and Representative Gosar had echoed that sentiment. The video was deleted.
Gosar reposted the video after his censure, before taking it down again. And joining me now is Democratic Senator Jon Tester of Montana. Senator Tester.
And I won't have a clip of Jon Tester. I have Republican Senator Kevin Cramer, also who's from North Dakota. Jon Tester is from is Montana. I'm pretty sure it's Montana. Both from those big empty states up on the top. And they actually both kind of agree about Kyle Rittenhouse. In an interesting way, they both think that even though the jury reached the correct verdict, that he shouldn't have been out there with the gun and he wasn't being safe, and it's not something we want people to do, and that maybe even anyway, when I get to those clips, I'll talk about that some more. But like I said, I thought that might have been one of the best news summaries from NBC. When I first saw how, especially in the live intro there, how Chuck Todd was trying to weave the Rittenhouse verdict into their ongoing theme of rising violence on the right and the threat to American democracy, I was thinking maybe it was going to be a stretch, but especially when you see how so many on the right have taken Kyle Rittenhouse as some kind of hero, even though he was maybe I should talk a little bit more about the trial here. As many of my longtime viewers know, I spent about 5 years as a criminal defense attorney, as a public defender. I used to do jury trials. I actually was pretty successful at jury trials. But I'm not going to go into all that, but I do have some background and experience and training. I did, especially when I started in Missouri. It's a statewide system, and I did a whole many hours of jury trial training where they're supposed to make you into a trial lawyer, and you learn a bunch of things. And one of the most important things you have to understand about jury trials is that juries make their emotional decision first, and then they come up with the reasons to support their emotional decision in the vast majority of jury trials. And the prosecutor did a really bad job. I don't know if it was a winnable case for the prosecution, because they had to prove that Kyle Rittenhouse didn't act in self-defense beyond a reasonable doubt, which doesn't even mean that his acquittal means he acted in self-defense. You have to keep that in mind. It means that the prosecution didn't prove beyond a reasonable doubt that he didn't act in self-defense. And that's the thing. A lot of the video was blurry there. He came and told his story. He had $1 million defense team, which most defendants don't have. They apparently did 2 different mock trials, one in which he testified and one in which he didn't. And he lost when he didn't testify, and he was really well prepared. And The prosecutor did not cross-examine him well. That's one of the secrets of prosecutors, is they're often not very good trial lawyers. They, especially for cross-examination, because most of their case is like putting police officers on and getting them to tell their story. And so like the prosecutor's big job in the trial is to say, and then what happened? And then what happened? And what happened next then, officer? I mean, prosecutors rarely go to trial, or most people don't go to trial. About 90% of cases, depending on the jurisdiction, end in plea bargains. And when they do go to trial, the defendant rarely testifies. So the cross-examination skills of prosecutors aren't good. I think Kyle Rittenhouse lied multiple times. I mean, everyone knows he lied about being an EMT. But he lied in one of the videos. You can see him lying right after shooting someone, saying he had a gun, which they did not cross-examine him well on. They let him get away with like this whole thing about, I was afraid if I didn't shoot him. This is the first guy, the guy who threw the bag at him. I was afraid if I didn't shoot him, he was going to take the gun away from me, shoot me, and probably shoot other people. Like, is that reasonable? That whole, especially when the gun is like strapped to him, so it's almost impossible to take it. Anyway, there was a lot of ways he could have been cross-examined better, but given the standard and given the evidence, it would be difficult to convict him. That's my, I think it was definitely a winnable case for just about any reasonable defense attorney because of what I just explained. But as I explained, that doesn't mean he even acted in self-defense. It only means the prosecution couldn't prove it. And the prosecution didn't, they did this thing. I remember the prosecutor in my first felony trial did, where they started with a witness that like was bad for their case, that like put that showed the threat to, anyway, I didn't watch the entire trial. I watched the entire testimony of Kyle Rittenhouse. I watched the entire closing arguments of both sides, and like most people, I was not surprised by the verdict. But anyway, I don't know why I went into all that in this particular spot in my live stream, but I should get to the next news summary, which is basically, it mentions the Kyle Rittenhouse verdict briefly as important news, talks about the COVID surge and the vaccine booster recommendation, mainly, I guess, because they have Dr. Anthony Fauci on. In fact, they didn't really have any good guests other than their panel discussion talking about the Kyle Rittenhouse verdict, which is why I'm going to, in clip 10, I will actually have Dr. Anthony Fauci talking about vaccine boosters for everyone. But before I get to that, I'm going to get through the rest of the news summaries and the newsmakers on the Kyle Rittenhouse verdict. But here's ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos, hosted by Martha Raddatz, talking about the COVID surge, vaccine booster recommendation, and the Kyle Rittenhouse verdict over here.
Good morning and welcome to This Week. As we approach the Thanksgiving holiday, millions of Americans will be on the move. The TSA predicting travel may near pre-pandemic levels. And as COVID cases rise once again, concern growing about another winter surge. The CDC on Friday green-lit vaccine booster shots for all adults. Dr. Anthony Fauci is standing by. But we begin this morning with the dramatic verdict in the Kyle Rittenhouse trial, a case that inflamed debates in this country about race, guns, and vigilantism. The jury finding Rittenhouse acted in lawful self-defense when he fatally shot 2 men and wounded a 3rd during the turbulent racial justice protests in Kenosha, Wisconsin last year. The victims' families expressed outrage at the criminal justice system as Rittenhouse applauded the verdict.
The jury reached the correct verdict. Self-defense is not illegal. It's been a rough journey, but we made it through it.
And here to analyze the fallout is our ABC team following the case since the beginning. Senior national correspondent Terry Moran, just back from Kenosha, chief national correspondent and Nightline co-anchor Byron Pitts, and ABC News contributor Shauna Lloyd, a managing partner of the Cochran law firm. Welcome to you all. And Terry, I want to start with you.
And I'm not going to show you that pundit discussion. If you go to the link under sources in the video description, you can see the source of all my clips, including the This Week with George Stephanopoulos full program, where you can watch that if you're interested in the opinion of those experts. As usual, I try not to be a commentator on the commentators because that's like too meta. Oh, wait, can I even use the word too meta now? That meta means Facebook? I don't know. It's too meta in a pre-Facebook way, I guess. But that news summary, one thing I guess I would criticize Martha Raddatz to say that the jury found he acted in lawful self-defense, which, as I was explaining before I showed the clip, that's not completely accurate. The jury found that the prosecution didn't prove beyond a reasonable doubt that he didn't act in self-defense, which means that, there's stuff that happened like behind the cars and you can't really see, and he tells one story and there's not enough evidence to totally disprove it, but that could also lead to an acquittal because the prosecution has to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that it wasn't self-defense, and so the jury verdict doesn't necessarily mean that the jury decided that he really did act in self-defense. I guess if you're a defendant who's gotten an acquittal, then it doesn't really matter. As far as you're concerned, the jury found you acted in self-defense because they bought your affirmative defense there. Once the defendant raises enough evidence, then the burden shifts to the prosecution. Anyway, I've pretty much gone over that, I guess. And then I'm going to show you this CNN State of the Union news summary. Dana Bash pretty much fits all the topics you saw in the longer news summaries. So I don't know, does this mean it's the Billy Joel We Didn't Start the Fire award for, I don't know, you tell me what you think after we watch that second shortest of the news summaries together over here.
Hello, I'm Dana Bash in Washington, where the state of our union is taking stock. As the holiday week approaches, President Biden has some good news to be thankful for. After weeks of tense negotiations, Friday the House passed the cornerstone plan of President Biden's agenda, the roughly $2 trillion social safety net and climate bill, what he calls Build Back Better. But on the other side of Thanksgiving, another huge challenge lies ahead for Democrats, convincing moderate Senators Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema to sign on to the legislation. As Biden confronts rising inflation and falling poll numbers, and while Democrats fight over the scope of their policies, Republicans in Washington are facing a reckoning over conduct. This week, only 2 Republicans voted to censure Arizona Congressman Paul Gosar for posting an edited video depicting him appearing to kill Democratic Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Not only did Gosar's Republican colleagues essentially condone the behavior, the party's de facto leader, former President Donald Trump, endorsed his reelection. Joining me now is Republican Governor Chris Sununu, who announced this month that he...
No, I'm not going to have a Chris Sununu clip. The clip I have from CNN State of the Union is Winsome Sears, the Lieutenant Governor-elect of Virginia. That, like I said, that's coming up, clip 11. I think Dana Bash did a good job of fitting a lot of topics in almost the shortest amount of time. I think one of the worst news summaries is what the news summary that Face the Nation did at the beginning of their program, because it's all about their poll and how their poll was bad for Biden. And then they go to Anthony Salvanto, their chief poll guy, and I cut it off at that point, but I'll show you that very brief news summary before I show you a much better news summary that happened later in the show with Mark Strassman. But first, here's the beginning of the show news summary from about bad poll numbers for Biden from CBS yesterday over here.
Good morning and welcome to Face the Nation. We have a lot to get to today, and we begin with a brand new CBS News poll. It doesn't have a lot of good news politically for President Biden. His approval rating is at 44%, his lowest in our polling since he took office. And it's the economy that is taking a toll on the president's standing as prices for food, gas, and other items continue to rise. 67% of Americans now disapprove of the president's handling of inflation. Joining us now to discuss it is CBS News Director of Surveys and Elections, Anthony Salvanto.
Yeah, and as usual, I should point out that if you want to see the entire CBS News Face the Nation program for free on YouTube, That's where the link in the video description under sources goes to their YouTube channel, where they split the whole thing up into segments on their YouTube page, including that whole report from Anthony Salvanto, if you really want to see it. But I mean, bad poll numbers a year out from the midterms isn't necessarily the most important thing, but I think the news summary that Margaret Brennan and then mostly Mark Strassman did a little later in the program, before they talked to Derek Johnson, sorry, I couldn't remember his name for a second, Derek Johnson, the CEO of the NAACP, and the Mark Strassman reports on the Kyle Rittenhouse verdict, the Ahmaud Arbery trial, and I think the reaction of the NAACP is one of the best reactions, making the point that I'm trying to make, answering the question of my title topic, whether this Kyle Rittenhouse verdict makes America more dangerous. And I think Derek Johnson explains it best of all the newsmakers after, I don't know, this is, juxtapose this with the second news summary, the one from NBC News Meet the Press, and which I'm not sure which of the two is the best. I think it's definitely a competition between these two. And anyway, I'll talk about all that a little more after you watch the last of the news summaries and then the first of the newsmaker interviews. Especially, I want to talk about what Derek Johnson has to say, talking to Margaret Brennan after the report from Mark Strassman over in this clip.
Like many Americans, we've been closely watching two trials related to race and the criminal justice system. Mark Strassman reports from Atlanta.
Kyle Rittenhouse, not guilty, sparked protests from New York.
All persons leave the area now.
To Portland, Oregon, which police there labeled a riot. But in the divided states of America, that verdict from Wisconsin means both redemption.
It's nice to know that when individuals take a stand to defend themselves, that the jury system in this country will recognize their right of self-defense.
And repudiation.
You can't tell me that these institutions are not sick. You cannot tell me that these institutions are not tainted with racism.
In the chaos of Kenosha last August, Rittenhouse, then 17, killed two men with his AR-15 style assault rifle. He claimed self-defense. Rittenhouse drove in from Illinois armed for battle. He knew outrage already ran high. 2 days earlier, a white cop had shot a black man 7 times in the back. The officer was never charged. Jacob Blake remains paralyzed from the waist down. Justin Blake, his uncle, angry about the Rittenhouse verdict.
We knew he wasn't going to jail for life, but we thought he'd go to jail and get spanked a little bit for his actions.
And he believes, had Rittenhouse been black,
they'd have had him on the ground eating dirt or shot him dead on sight.
Lots to unpack here. This country's ongoing moment of racial reckoning, vigilantism, and self-defense claims from armed people who deputize themselves, and frustration with what many see as America's two systems of justice, separate and unequal. This murder trial of 3 men in Brunswick, Georgia, has all those issues.
This is a life or death situation, and I'm going to have to stop him from doing this, so I shot.
Ahmaud Arbery was jogging through a neighborhood. 3 white men suspected him of burglary. They chased him, cornered him like a rat, one of them said later. In a confrontation he initiated, Travis McMichael killed Arbery with his shotgun. McMichael also claimed self-defense, often tough cases for prosecutors. They grilled him on the stand. How was Arbery a threat?
Didn't pull out any guns.
No, ma'am.
Didn't pull out any knife.
No, ma'am.
He hasn't said one word to you.
He has not.
He's not threatened you in any way, verbally or physically.
No, ma'am.
The Arbery case has echoes of Trayvon Martin 9 years earlier. Both times, wannabe cops misidentified burglary suspects. Young black men shot dead. Gunman claims self-defense. No one's arrested for weeks. A jury later found George Zimmerman, Martin's killer, not guilty of murder. In that Georgia case, closing arguments will begin tomorrow. Only one black juror will hear them.
This court has found that there appears to be intentional discrimination in the panel.
That verdict whatever it is, will fuel America's clashing definitions of justice and fairness.
That was Mark Strassman reporting. We go now to the head of the NAACP, Derek Johnson, who joins us from Jackson, Mississippi. Good morning to you, sir.
Good morning.
So the jury accepted Kyle Rittenhouse's explanation that he was acting in self-defense. President Biden said, this was disappointing in some ways, but the jury system works and we have to abide by it. You say the verdict itself was dangerous.
It's hard for African Americans to reconcile what we witnessed in that trial. We have far too many individuals sitting in jail for crimes they didn't commit or overcharged for crimes that were committed. And here you have a 17-year-old who illegally purchased a gun, traveled across state lines to protect property that was not his for owners who did not invite him, and he put in harm's way based on the rhetoric that he's seen on social media platforms. So it's hard to reconcile the verdict with the experience that many African Americans have faced over the several decades. So this trial for us is a warning shot that vigilante justice is allowed in this country or in particular communities.
Kyle Rittenhouse, as you know, has become this sort of icon for some within the conservative movement. He was used back during the campaign by the then Biden campaign team in a campaign video that positioned him as a white supremacist. His mother said that was defamatory to him. The bottom line is this is being politicized. And I'm wondering what you think the impact of that is.
Well, the current political environment has allowed for this type of behavior. The prior administrations opened the door, and many individuals who operate under the banner of white supremacy have run through the door, whether it's Charlottesville or the killings in Pittsburgh at the synagogue or in Louisville. And unfortunately, until we have mature politicians willing to stand up, regardless of political affiliations, and address the questions of mob violence, vigilantism, but more importantly, the underlying issue of race in this country, something we have never truly addressed.
But there is no evidence of him being a white supremacist himself, correct?
Well, it's not about the evidence of him being a white supremacist. It is about the position that individuals like him find themselves in, where they think they have to go and protect property because of a peaceful protest, in some cases, of Black Lives Matter organizing. Black Lives Matter is a value proposition. It's not an organization in one sense. It's not about a hashtag. It's a value proposition that the lives of African Americans have been diminished and our lives matter. And when you have scenarios like what took place in Wisconsin that caused people to stand up with this police officer who paralyzed another innocent individual, you have to begin to ask ourselves for questions. Do we value the lives of not only African Americans, but everyone? And what he did was take up the mantle because the political climate allowed for him to do that. We had a white supremacist in the White House, and it opened the door to this floodgate of vigilante violence. And that's the real question here.
Having a white supremacist in the White House opens the floodgates of vigilantism, and that's what we see here. And it doesn't mean that Kyle Rittenhouse himself is a white supremacist, though he's obviously kind of right-wing. And I really think that the analysis of Derek Johnson is important in terms of both the danger of vigilantism to the Black Lives Matter movement and the fight for racial justice, and also about the differences in the criminal justice system. I was talking about how Kyle Rittenhouse got this $1 million defense. Most people don't even get a trial. You can read, of course, this book that I've had up here for so long, The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander. That's really important. Also, a new book I recently, I'm about halfway through, is over here, over my shoulder. It's The Complicity of Lawyers in the Criminal Injustice System by Alec Karakatsanis, which really talks about how what we make illegal and where police enforce the law has a lot to do with the existing power structure, which is kind of like critical legal studies, which is the basis of critical race theory. So anyway, I haven't finished reading it, but I follow that guy on Twitter, and he often does these long tweet threads about injustices in the Houston jail. And so I was reading that book I told you last week I went to Houston for a wedding, and anyway, but I also think that news summary was, now that I've watched it closer, juxtaposed more closely with the NBC News Meet the Press one, I think the NBC News one was better. It talked more about the right-wing echo machine raising praising and raising vigilantism, and Kyle Rittenhouse in particular. And you saw from a couple outlets there, Kyle Rittenhouse and Tucker Carlson, but not from Fox News, like I said. But I think CBS News didn't have the best of the news summaries, but Derek Johnson from the NAACP, that was a great guest to have and a great voice on this issue. But I want to move on to 3 different Republicans. First, Kevin Cramer of North Dakota, who actually is more reasonable than Chris Christie. Oh, I'm sorry, it's just 2 Republicans, Kevin Cramer and Chris Christie. And then I have Anthony Fauci, who I don't think is a Republican. Anyone think Anthony Fauci's a Republican? I'm betting if he was a Republican, as a rich doctor might be a Republican, right? It's good for his body. He probably got a big tax cut under the Trump administration. But somehow I think after the Trump administration, Anthony Fauci, not a Republican. Maybe not, probably not before, but I don't know. Does anyone even know if Anthony... But anyway, I have 2 Republicans. First, Kevin Cramer, the senator from North Dakota, who is weirdly to the left of former New Jersey Governor Chris Christie, who just wrote this book about how he's basically trying to take the Republican Party back from the conspiracy theories. And I think he's trying to position him. He even says he's running for president probably. And anyway, and he's trying to maybe get Trump either out of the party or stop looking backward and talking about 2020. And I don't know if that's why he has to be to the right of the senator from North Dakota. But before I get to Chris Christie, let me show you the Kevin Cramer clip. This is Kevin Cramer talking to Chuck Todd on NBC News' Meet the Press after Senator John Tester from Montana basically said that the jury system worked, but this kid was reckless and shouldn't have been out there with a gun. And you'll see he kind of recapitulates what John Tester said, but then goes beyond, and then even talks about Chuck Todd at least asks him about how Kyle Rittenhouse has been lionized on the right. But there's at least one thing that Chuck Todd doesn't ask him about that I will ask, or I will tell you about after we watch that clip together over here.
Let me start with the Rittenhouse verdict. It's pretty divisive in this country. In some ways, you and I think Senator Tester share similar constituencies, and so I think you have a sense of it maybe helping to explain the divide to urban and suburban America. But what was your reaction to the verdict, and why is he being hailed as a hero on the right?
Well, Chuck, I don't know that he's probably being held as a hero by some. I think largely what he's being held as an innocent person involved in this case. The symbolism that surrounded it, I think, is not reflective of the facts on the ground. I think, frankly, John Tester explained it pretty well. I mean, justice has been done by a jury of his peers, and I think, frankly, that when you look at the videotape, the videos and things that became more apparent later in the trial, you find a kid that was in the wrong place at the wrong time, should not have had a gun probably with him, but he didn't provoke what was happening to him. He responded in self-defense. I think people should be reminded that the people that he shot were also violent criminals and armed at that. It's not like he just snuck up on some guys. So the problem is, I think justice was done, but the rhetoric surrounding it probably on both sides is inappropriate to the actual event itself.
I want to read you something from conservative writer David French. And here's what he wrote about the incident earlier this week. He said, a political movement that turns a deadly and ineffective vigilante into a role model is a movement that is courting more violence and encouraging more young men to recklessly brandish weapons in dangerous places, and that will spill more blood in America's streets. He's not the only one concerned about this. Do you have concern that some people will get the wrong message from this verdict?
Well, what I get concerned about is a political movement that devalues police officers, that then cuts their funding, that makes them into the bad guys in keeping our streets safe and our communities safe. That kind of rhetoric, I'm afraid, leads to the very same violence that we're talking about. Now, a lot of people talk about having a discussion. The very first public event I had after I got to Congress was having a discussion around guns that included lots of people, including people of faith, people from schools, practitioners, pastors. And we don't do that anymore. And I agree that I think we need to have that discussion, but both sides need to want to have that discussion, not just use it for their own political gain.
The rise in open carry laws and in stand your ground laws, is it sending the wrong message of almost encouraging folks to use their weapon in public places?
No, I think it sends the message that you have a right to defend yourself against increasing violence. And again, let's get back to supporting our police officers. Let's get back to supporting solid laws that protect innocent people, so that innocent people don't feel like they have to always protect themselves. That said, they do have the right to defend themselves, especially in their own homes, which is largely what some of the laws you're talking about are about, particularly stand your ground.
Right, but the public spaces, do you think there's a point where this goes too far? Stand your ground at home, I think, is one thing. Stand your ground anywhere else in the community, it seems that expansiveness is what's got some folks troubled.
I don't know, Chuck. There are an awful lot of stories about people who are grateful that the person next to them at a public space was carrying when there wasn't anybody else there to protect them against another violent criminal. I don't think this is so much about guns as it is about the heart of people. There is no question that we are living at a time in our country where the Congress that you see that appears very divided is really a reflection of our communities that are very divided. So we all have a role to play in this. It's not just top down or just bottom up. We all have a role, and we ought to use our platforms to do that.
No, I say Congress is a mirror to society, and people need to see that. Speaking of attacks,
that's right.
You've been the subject of attacks from the former president for simply support.
And so you can see he changes subjects there. Congress is a mirror to society, and people have to see that. I don't know. That's, I guess, some sort of on spur of the moment wisdom from Chuck Todd, but I think he had his prepared cross-examination, whatever, and let Senator Cramer there get away with both the whole, like, the best thing to stop a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun, and people are happy that there's a good guy with a gun there in these situations, and I find that at best simplistic and at worst misleading, especially in the Kyle Rittenhouse case, because I mean, who were the good guys and the bad guys with the guns? And I mean, multiple people had guns, and none of them were truly good or they were all complex human beings, and that was one of the other things Chuck Todd let Senator Cramer get away with there. Is he said they were like all the people he killed were violent armed criminals. Well, I mean, anyone who commits a crime or has a criminal, has like got a speeding ticket, technically, I guess, as a criminal, but calling someone a criminal as if that sums up their whole life, that is overly pejorative. But armed, I mean, there was the one guy who survived, right, Gage Grosskreutz, who he actually was armed, and he admitted to like pointing his gun, but he didn't want to fire. But Joseph Rosenbaum, I mean, earlier in the day, he had a chain that he obviously didn't have. He was armed with like a plastic bag. And then Anthony Huber, armed with a skateboard. I don't know. I would have cross-examined Senator Cramer on that, but That's my criticism of Chuck Todd there. I know some of you love when I criticize Chuck Todd, so there you go. That's your Chuck Todd criticism for the week. And then I want to juxtapose I disagree with what Cramer said there, and he kept coming back to the police also. That's my other big criticism, not of Chuck Todd, but of Senator Cramer. His answers, we need to fund the police, but the police did a really bad job. That's what I was talking about in terms of this ACLU tweet thread that I retweeted, and I put a link down in the video description under sources. That's the top one where you can read the whole thing. But this is based on actual information the ACLU gathered after Kenosha that shows that they let order break down in the streets there that caused all the melees that caused Kyle Rittenhouse to feel like he was threatened somehow. And the police did a bad job there. I remember going all the way back to Charlottesville. That's one of my conclusions from Charlottesville is the police did a really bad job there that ended in the death of Heather Heyer, but not even before that, in the not keeping the warring sides apart. That's one of the few things that they're supposed to be able to do that prevents crime, because police don't do a lot to prevent crime. Mostly they show up afterwards and try to find the person who did it. One of the things they don't tell you about is what they spend their time on. That's another thing that's in this book here. About 2% of the time they spend is on violent crime. And then there's no evidence that what they do actually deters crime, or even that putting people in jail helps those people or society in general. And the whole thing is just the whole criminal legal system is kind of a scam in a way. And Senator Cramer got away with saying a lot of stuff that's not true about, it's all about not respecting police, but that's not really the problem. And so I wanted to point that out. And now I will show you the Chris Christie clip where, in terms of, he won't say one bad thing about Kyle Rittenhouse. At least Kevin Cramer, the senator from North Dakota, is willing to say that he should have been out there and he was being reckless and he's not a hero. But this is Chris Christie talking to Bret Baier on Fox News Sunday, to the right, like I said, of the senator from North Dakota over in this clip.
What's your reaction to the Kyle Rittenhouse verdict?
Justice was done in that, Bret, and the jury system works. I was a prosecutor for 7 years, and those charges should never have been brought. And, prosecutors are not supposed to give in to the whims of the public. They're not supposed to give in to public opinion. You're supposed to dispassionately look at the facts and the evidence and decide whether they support charges. And from the beginning, I didn't think that these acts supported charges. And I'm glad to see that a jury sat there, not affected by public pressure, but sat and listened to the evidence and made the decision that they did. He was not guilty. He shouldn't have been indicted. And we should now move forward. And I hope that everyone will leave this young man alone now and let him go to living his life. He should not become a political symbol for anybody. He's 18 years old. He should be allowed to now go on and live his life after what has been an extraordinarily difficult time for both Kyle Rittenhouse and his family.
Yeah, but are you surprised by the coverage of this all throughout and the polarized nature of it?
Unfortunately, I wasn't, Bret. I think those people on the left are just attempting to continue to tear our country apart for political gain. Anybody who looked at the videos of this could tell that this was an act of self-defense. Anyone who knows the law would know that. Yet you've had legal folks on the air and on other networks, and political commentators, and quite frankly, elected officials who spoke so irresponsibly and horribly about this young man without a basis in fact. That's not what we should be doing, and that's why I'm so proud of our justice system, because you know what? It's not perfect, Bret, but it's the best system anyone ever has come up with in terms of trying to determine guilt or innocence in our society, and that's why I'm so proud of the jury and the jury system, because it gave Kyle Rittenhouse a chance that all of these other talking heads on television didn't give him. They had him convicted a long time ago.
Here's the governor-elect of Virginia, Glenn Youngkin.
And there they changed the subject, and yeah, like I said, it's kind of weird there that he's to the right of, I don't know, maybe he's trying to shore up his bona fides to run for president because he was more in favor of gun control when he was governor of New Jersey, because it's like an urban blue state, but anyway, trying to talk tough, but I don't know. What Kyle Rittenhouse did, I talked about that extensively. I don't have to go over that again. I did see, while I was looking at your live comments during the clip, that I got a couple Super Chat contributions from Lulu Girl. It is a tough topic, and but also blaming cops, like I was saying, especially if you look at the ACLU thread, you find that they created the dangerous situation, they didn't protect the protesters, and they were complicit with these white militia groups, even if Kyle Rittenhouse himself is not a white militia member or whatever, or a white supremacist or whatever they've been complaining about on Fox News all week that supposedly Joe Biden said, although I thought I heard him say allegedly in the one clip I actually saw of him saying it, but apparently there was also a commercial that included Kyle Rittenhouse, but I don't know, that's like core political speech, and people talking about defamation for Kyle Rittenhouse. I actually think that maybe the families of the people he shot have the possibility of suing him and suing the police, but just because he's not guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, and that the jury couldn't find beyond a reasonable doubt that it wasn't self-defense, that doesn't mean if the burden of proof changes in a civil suit where they just have to prove him 51% liable, and they can say that he was just negligent by being out there with an AR-15 and, a 17-year-old out there with very little training and lying about his training. And anyway, I think that he may end up owing some money, but I guess he's raised so much money from his right-wing benefactors, and who knows what he's going to get from this whole Tucker Carlson documentary. I don't know. He also seemed kind of like a junior police officer. That went my impression watching him testify, that he had spent a lot of time like watching cops or whatever, though apparently he didn't, even though he was like a junior police officer, junior firefighter. It didn't really involve that much training and expertise on his part, but he kind of reminded me of a police officer, and he's using like a police officer's defense. I feared for my life, so I had to shoot the guy who was unarmed, and anyway, but that defense works for police officers all the time as well. So anyway, I think I've talked enough about the main topic. Now I'm going to show you the Anthony Fauci clip, and then the Winsome Sears clip to end the program. But regarding the Anthony Fauci clip, you'll see a brief introduction from Martha Raddatz on ABC talking about the spike in COVID cases. There may in fact even be a fifth wave, and now they're recommending vaccine boosters for everyone. I actually kind of I didn't lie. I maybe exaggerated my weight in order to get a COVID booster a couple weeks ago before I had to go to Texas. You have to be obese, and I'm not obese. I'm like maybe 9 or 10 pounds short of obese based on my BMI. You have to have a body mass index of 30, but I am overweight, so I checked that part of the form when I went to the pharmacy to get the shot, and then when I was supposed to specify, I said overweight/obese. So I didn't like lie on a health form or something, which that might even be a crime, but I did sort of in some. And then when the guy actually asked me, he couldn't, like the type was too small. I said, "What is that?" I said, I just said too fat. So that is definitely not a lie, right? Anyway, so I got my booster. I was ahead of the science because I got my booster a couple weeks ago. is it like 2.5 weeks at this point, I think. So I'm like fully vaccinated, and I think that's basically what everyone should do. But as I think I saw them say on one of the programs, the real problem isn't getting people to get their third shot. It's the people who should be getting their first shot. And anyway, here's I'm going to show you Anthony Fauci talking about the new vaccine booster requirements, and then a lot of misinformation on both critical race theory and vaccine boosters from the newly elected Lieutenant Governor of Virginia. So I guess these two clips do kind of go together in that way, but I'll start with the Anthony Fauci clip that I will talk a little more with you about after we watch together over here.
Now to the latest on the coronavirus pandemic. The CDC on Friday endorsing Pfizer and Moderna boosters for all adults, allowing millions more Americans to get their third shots before hitting the road this holiday weekend. It comes amid a new surge in COVID cases, up nearly 50% since late October. Here to discuss is President Biden's chief medical advisor, Dr. Anthony Fauci. Good morning, Dr. Fauci. You have long been convinced about the data that shows the benefits of boosting everyone after 6 months. But it was less than 5 weeks ago when the CDC chose not to recommend boosters for all adults. What finally changed their minds?
Well, I think the data became very, very clear. We were looking at data when I was saying that I really felt very strongly that we should be getting boosters to everyone. The data was coming from mostly from Israel and other countries. But now that you look at the data as it's evolved in the United States, it's very clear. They wanted to make sure that the safety signals were right. And once that became very clear, right now, I'm very pleased that we're in a situation where there's no confusion, there's no lack of clarity, that if you've been vaccinated with a primary vaccination with an mRNA vaccine, either the Pfizer or the Moderna, 6 months or more ago, get boosted. And the same with regard to J&J. If you were vaccinated 2 months ago, get boosted. And that's really now clear. There's no ambiguity about that. And we really hope that people go out there and utilize this very important tool to optimize their status with regard to protection.
And Connecticut and New Mexico's governors said they don't consider Americans fully vaccinated unless they have had a booster. You've said that's not on the table federally yet. But if the immunity drops so substantially without a booster, why shouldn't the White House adopt that standard as soon as possible?
Well, first of all, you want to go with the science, Martha. And right now, if you look at the data that we have, fully vaccinated right now by definition is the original 2 doses with the mRNA and the Pfizer and Moderna, and a single dose with J&J. We'll continue to follow the data because right now, when we're boosting people, what we're doing, following them, we're going to see what the durability of that protection is. And as we always do, you just follow and let the data guide your policy and let the data guide your recommendations.
Let's talk about later on. Pfizer CEO Albert Bourla recently said there's a high chance boosters would be needed annually. Do you think that's a possibility, or do you believe it might be even sooner, like every 6 months?
You know, we follow the data, and it's so easy to predict, Martha, about how often you would need it. We would hope, and this is something that we're looking at very carefully, that third shot with the mRNA not only boosts you way up, but increases the durability so that you will not necessarily need it every 6 months or a year. We're hoping it pushes it out more. If it doesn't, and the data show we do need it more often, then we'll do it. But you want to make sure you get the population optimally protected, and you do whatever you need to do to make sure you do that. My hope as an immunologist, as an infectious disease person, that maturation of the response, increasing its strength and power, will be followed by a greater durability. That's what I'm hoping for. If it doesn't happen, we'll act accordingly.
And Dr. Fauci, the Wall Street Journal is also reporting a pretty incredible statistic that deaths from...
that was an interesting... If you want to watch the whole interview, go down to This Week with George Stephanopoulos in the sources section of my video description. The question she asked next is about apparently more people have died this year than last year in the United States from COVID, which is pretty disturbing, especially given the availability of the vaccine. And it just shows how I don't know, stupidity is a pre-existing condition. I don't know, or it's incredibly sad that in a wealthy country where two administrations, the Trump administration and the Biden administration, worked together to develop and distribute vaccines pretty much to anyone who wanted it by March, April was right around when supply started to outstrip demand. I mean, it's so sad that so many people decided for whatever irrational reasons to avoid getting vaccinated, and the Delta spread, that's what he was talking about. But the rest of that information about the vaccine boosters, that's, the expert information right from the proverbial horse's mouth, Anthony Fauci, right? He's the pandemic expert, also working for two administrations, both trusted by Donald Trump or whatever. I mean, Donald Trump can't say only nice things about anyone, but he was kept in there by Trump and then kept in there by Biden. So, and he's worked for many other administrations as well. So I don't know why he gets such a bad rap. And I've talked about some of his conflicts with Republicans in the past, but what he's saying about boosters, I mean, hopefully, like he said, the third shot's the charm, and maybe it'll last for years instead of 6 months or whatever. Maybe it'll be a yearly flu shot, like an endemic, not a pandemic. But I want to get to the final newsmaker clip before the bonus Dash and Sandy or Dandy clip, although it's bad news about Dash. Dash is still with us, and I still have a clip of him. It's mainly Dash, but Dash is not doing well, as I will discuss at the end of the program for the Dash and Sandy or Dandy fans out there. But first, this is sort of a bookend newsmaker clip. At the beginning of the program, I showed my political comedy clip where Michael Harriot and Maria Teresa Kumar and Jonathan Capehart all kind of made fun of the newly elected lieutenant governor in Virginia, Winsome Sears, and what she said about critical race theory and what she said about vaccines and her own vaccine status and, in your DNA, what's in your coffee cup and all that. And I contended that even if you look at the entire clip, the entire context, almost all that criticism is warranted. That it's even more criticism. At one point, she says this stupid thing like, "You're vaccinated wearing a mask. Why do you need me to wear a mask if you're wearing a mask?" Well, my mask protects you. Your mask protects me. That's one of the things. A simple thing that someone who's lieutenant governor of a major state should know, that my mask protects you. Your mask protects me. So there's something she says about masks that's ridiculous, and she doesn't get. The thing is, there's so much misinformation. Dana Bash she finds one or two in each follow-up question, but I guess it's kind of like remember the old Kellyanne Conway clips where it's just like a deluge of lies, and what can you do? I mean, I'm not going to say this is lie. It's more like misinformation and Republican talking points. It's not Kellyanne Conway material, but this is definitely the Trump-based talking points, and I'm playing. It's 7 minutes 41 seconds, just so that you get the entire context of. I keep playing all the way through you want to get into my DNA thing, and all the way. Like I said, the one thing that she does say that they miscriticized her for in the previous clip is she does actually tell people to get vaccinated, but she also says that there's all these problems with the vaccines, and misinformation makes them sound bad in ways that sort of undermine that message. And anyway, I've pre-criticized the clip enough. It's a pretty long clip, but I needed to cut it this long to get the complete context of the first clip I showed you, and I'll talk about both of those clips a little more after we watch that clip together over here.
Let's talk about education more broadly. You oppose critical race theory being taught in schools, which I should say is not part of Virginia's curriculum. You did say, though, that the good and the bad of American history should be taught, and that we should also tell viewers you're the former vice president of the Virginia Board of Education. So explain how you think race should be taught in Virginia public schools.
Well, let me back up. I beg to differ that CRT is not taught.
I didn't say that. I just said it's not in the curriculum, just to be clear.
No. It is part of the curriculum. It's weaved in and out of the curriculum. In fact, in 2015, former governor, who was just defeated, McAuliffe, his state board of education had information on how to teach it, so it's weaved in. So, you know, it's semantics, but it's weaved in. What we want to say, and what Governor-elect Youngkin has said, is that all of history must be taught, the good, the bad, and the ugly, because what we learn from history, Dana, is that we don't learn from history, and we continue to repeat the same mistakes. But while we're talking about history, how about we talk about how people from the 1890s, black people from the 1890s to about 1950, 1960, according to the U.S. Census, had been marrying in a percentage that had far surpassed anything that whites had ever done. When we talk about the Tulsa race riots, let's ask ourselves, how did the black people amass so much wealth right after the Civil War so that it could even be destroyed? How did they do that? You know, they were coming from nothing, from zero. Some of them never even got the 40 acres and a mule. Let's try to emulate that. The one thing that the slaves wanted, well, three top things: their freedom, certainly. Then the next thing was they wanted to find their families. And the third thing was they wanted an education. And my God, when did education become a bad word among black people? No. We are going to have a good education system. It's going to represent all people, and I'm going to help see that through, because education lifted my father out of poverty when he came to America with only $1.75. Education lifted me because I have to find my own way in this world, and education will lift all of us.
I want to talk about keeping on schools, but about vaccines in schools. Virginia public schools are required, children are required there to get vaccinated for a lot of things, including polio and measles and chickenpox. So why is it okay to mandate childhood vaccines in Virginia for so many diseases, but not COVID?
Well, let's ask ourselves, and I'm not saying yay or nay, let's ask ourselves, if the purpose of the COVID vaccine is to prevent us from getting COVID, then why is it that those who have had COVID must get the vaccine? The one doesn't follow the other. And so, you know, there are people who, when they get COVID, they also get the monoclonal antibody therapy, and it's working. It's working very well in Florida, if you notice what's happening there. And so one size doesn't fit all. Now, I have said, get the vaccine. And then if you're not going to get the vaccine, then, you know, do what's necessary to keep yourself safe, keep other people safe. But let me ask you this question. If you have the mask on, then why does somebody else have to wear the mask? You've got the mask, you've got the vaccine. My God, you're fully protected. You're armored. I think ultimately we have to remember that we're America. We love our freedom. We love our liberty. People are dying to get into this country so that they can do well for themselves and their families. Let's not make it like some other countries. Let's let liberty shine.
So just a couple of things that you said there. You said that people who have had COVID have the antibodies. That is true, but scientists don't think that lasts forever, and eventually they wane, just like the antibodies you get from your vaccine wanes, which is why people are getting boosters. But my question from the beginning was about the fact you talk about liberty, but there are already mandates for vaccines for a host of other diseases. So is COVID just becoming too political, especially as you even said, you want people to get vaccinated?
I'm not going to force anybody to do that. Now, you talk about it's become politicized, this COVID-19 vaccine, and it has. In fact, our president, President Biden, and Vice President Harris themselves both said they would not trust any vaccine that was developed by the Trump administration. That was before their election. After their election, they were singing a different song. And now everybody has to be vaccinated. In fact, President Biden, when he was candidate Biden, said that he would not force vaccines on us, and here we are. I mean, what are we really believing? Then we say we're going to go along with whatever the health and the sciences say. Well, then his very own FDA, 16-2, voted against booster shots. Then what happens? He comes out, his CDC director says they're going to have booster shots. Which science are we following? Then we hear that at the border, people are coming in COVID. No mask, no anything, and they're being let into the general population. But then the rest of us who are here have to mask up. What is the science? Can somebody tell us what to finally believe?
Yeah.
This is the problem. It is all politicized.
Yeah, well, in fairness, the science, it's a novel virus, and the science is changing, and scientists are learning about it. I just have to say that he said that the candidate Biden said that he wouldn't trust the Trump vaccine. What they said was that they would only trust it if the scientists determined it, not the politicians. But just before I let you go on this topic, during the campaign, you were, as I said, you're encouraging people to get vaccinated, but you're not saying whether you are vaccinated. Do you want to say now?
As I said, America, if it's nothing else, it's about liberty. It's about being able to live your life free from the government telling you what to do. And so we understand this thing about slippery slopes. The minute that I start telling you about my vaccine status, we're going to be down the bottom of the mountain trying to figure out how we got there, because now you want to know what's in my DNA. You're going to want to know this, that, and the other. In New York, you see, we have people, waiters asking people their vaccination status. And by the way, do you know what else they require? A photo ID to determine if this vaccine card you're presenting is really you. Who are we fooling? Come on. Let's say you get the vaccine. Go ahead and get the vaccine. If that's what you want to do, get the vaccine. Don't force it on anybody else. We know, and by the way, media, they're not telling us that people are suffering as a result of getting the vaccine. They have all kinds of problems. I understand it might be the minuscule, but when you're the one out of 30,000 that gets it, it's important to you. So we need to tell the good, the bad, and the ugly about the vaccine.
Before I let you go, I want to ask about what happened in Wisconsin this past week. A jury acquitted Kyle Rittenhouse.
And if you want to see the answer from Winsome Sears about Kyle Rittenhouse, there's, like I said, link down under sources in the video description to CNN's State of the Union. I think you can watch the entire interview there, including that answer. I pretty much pre-criticized that clip. Like I said, I think Dana Bash did some good follow-up questions, but there was just too much misinformation she left on the table there that the newly elected lieutenant governor of Virginia got away with. And I did show you 3 Republicans, right? And I don't know, I guess she was even to the right of Chris Christie being to the right of Kevin Cramer, but you did get 3 Republicans there. And, one thing about the Kyle Rittenhouse verdict, and I want to talk about that also with the Ahmaud Arbery case, which I watched some of the closing arguments today. The prosecutor's closing argument and the attorney for Travis McMichael, the guy who actually shot and killed Ahmaud Arbery. I saw that closing argument, and I saw most of the testimony of Travis McMichael. And the point I was going to make about my title topic, whether the Kyle Rittenhouse verdict makes America more dangerous, one thing that might be nice, that might mitigate some of that damage, is if Travis McMichael gets convicted of multiple felonies, because it's like Kyle Rittenhouse got away with the self-defense in this situation where, law and order is broken down because the cops didn't do their job, and, people are running around, and, there's all sorts of, there are gunshots going off before Kyle Rittenhouse fired his first shot. And so that might be difficult to prove beyond a reasonable doubt not being self-defense. But if Travis McMichael at least can get convicted of multiple felonies, and that's not self-defense. That's citizen's arrest for somebody who might have been trespassing. Not even trespassing, because trespassing you have to have criminal intent, or you have to be told to leave, and even that's a misdemeanor, and the citizen's arrest requires a felony. And they're saying burglary and just the whole thing. I think they're much more likely that at least Travis, it's Travis McMichael, his father Greg, and then the guy who took the videotape, whose name I can't remember, but it's all three of them on trial at once, and at least Travis McMichael should be convicted of multiple felonies. Hopefully would, like I said, mitigate, put an end cap on, maybe Kyle Rittenhouse engaged in self-defense, but this goes too far, where some guy's just running down the street in your neighborhood and you chase him down and shoot him because at the very last minute, I feared for my life because he ran in my direction. No, that hopefully that is not going to be, and I mean, it's not impossible. It's kind of the same situation where they have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt it wasn't citizen's arrest and wasn't self-defense. But once they prove beyond a reasonable doubt it's not citizen's arrest, then they can't claim self-defense when they're the aggressor. That's part of the jury instructions I saw talked about. And so I think there's a much more significant chance that at least Travis McMichael will be convicted. And I think that might help with this vigilantism problem that you saw discussed in a lot of the clips. So I just wanted to add that as a sort of capper commentary at the end. And I don't know if you can hear Dash sort of crying off in the distance, but for the Dash and Sandy or Dandy fans out there, this may be the last week that I'm actually going to have any clips of Dash, because Dash, for almost a week now, Dash has not been eating. He's been drinking water. That's the clip I'm going to show you from yesterday morning. Drinking some water, and you'll see when he lifts up his head, he's actually looking a little better because we took him to the vet and ran a bunch of tests. He's 16 and a half years old. He has pancreatitis. He has kidney disease and some sort of heart problem, and they don't know exactly. I mean, there was an option of putting him into the hospital for several days and with these treatments that probably wouldn't work, or or what we decided to do is it's possible there's an acute infection, and so we're giving him some antibiotics and a steroid for today will be the third dose, so we're hoping he is looking a little better, maybe because of the steroid, but still, he drank a little milk a couple days ago, but he drinks a lot of water, but has not had anything to eat since last Tuesday. And if he doesn't get any better in the next couple days, because he's crying all the time. And anyway, this, like I said, you can see in this Sandy is just briefly in this clip, because you're going to be seeing a lot more of Sandy and a lot less or no more of Dash possibly after this week. If things don't take a turn for the better, it's a sad situation. But anyway, here it is, your Dash and Sandy clip from yesterday morning over here.
There's no question that 6 weeks is not viability. Neither is Dobbs's 15 weeks viability. So both of them seem to me to be in clear violation of Roe versus Wade, the existing law, and the law should not be in effect. So I hope they will act quickly to take it out of effect.
Right, and the 6 weeks marker is one of the reasons that there's been so much attention on this. The other piece, of course, is the bounty hunter aspect of the Texas abortion law, unique in that private citizens can sue abortion providers violating the law. What complications has that part raised in the judge's deliberations of this case?
That's been the biggest problem for reviewing this particular law. To me, we're calling it bounty hunters, but it's really...
So there you see, that was Dash. Yesterday morning, you even, or it was actually, yeah, it was later in the afternoon, you heard, I think it was Alicia Menendez on MSNBC in the background. But yeah, that's all Dash has been doing, is going to the water bowls and drinking water. no eating for like 6 days. But, it can take antibiotics a few days to start working. So, and I see some nice wishes in the live comments there. Hopefully I'll have better news for you next week. But unfortunately, I think it might be bad news for Dash. Anyway, I'll be back next Monday, and there's other stuff going on, but maybe I'll just wait and talk about it next Monday after Thanksgiving. For those of you who celebrate the holiday, I guess hope you have a good vacation or time off or whatever you're doing, and I guess until next week, I'll be seeing all of you. Someone said, yeah, I know. His eyes are sunken. Get him on steroid. He is taking a steroid and an antibiotic. His eyes are sunken. We took him to the vet where we spent, I think I spent like over $1,000 on x-rays and other tests, and we're doing what's best for him. We don't want to like over-treat him and like have him spend his last few days in the hospital with, needles sticking in him. And anyway, I'm going to finish the show, but I'll tell you more what happened next Monday, and until then, I guess I'll be seeing all of you around the internet.